Hi everyone, my name is Amber. Welcome back to my channel. This is my May wrap up. A couple of things before we get started. Yes, I do have a fringe. I blow dried it a bit weirdly today, so that's why I've sort of like tucked it to the side. But I kind of went for like a Daisy Jones 70s look, and it does look good once I've actually styled it. Which I couldn't be bothered to do for this video. And then secondly, this wrap up is being recorded a little bit before the end of the month, so it might not be entirely accurate. There are probably some books that I'm going to finish off later on today or tomorrow, or in the next few days. Actually, there are more than 2 days after the end of the month. I have been in a reading slump for most of May. I've been really struggling. I've been trying to mood read as much as possible, and I've completely ignored my May TBR that I put up. I tried my best, I really did, but I don't know, I just wasn't in the right mindset. I was quite stressed with my job, and then Quill got a little bit stressed as well, so there were lots of things going on, and I had some plans. This could really annoy me. Okay, so as I was saying, I've been in a massive reading slump and have just kind of been mood reading. I only read 9 books in May, which is not very many for me. I normally read between 10 and 15 books each month, but I did read some really good books, and my average rating was actually 4 stars, which never happens to me. I would like a round of applause because I never rate books that highly, but in this case I did because I had a really good reading month in terms of what I read. So starting off with the first 3 books I read, because they're all related, I reread the entire Hex Hall Trilogy. I know that it's technically a series, there's a spin-off 4th book, but the author doesn't want to finish that spin-off series, so, or isn't finishing it off. I think something might have happened with her publisher, so I have only read these 3 before, and that's all I read now. So the first one is called Hex Hall, and this is about a girl called Sophie who is a witch. She's known that she's a witch for a couple of years at this point, and she has been moving from school to school because she is unable to properly control her powers. She tries to help her classmates, and then things keep going wrong, so she then has to up and leave and go to another school. So eventually the magical society council kind of hear about what she's been doing, and she gets sent to a place called Hex Hall, where they cater to witches, warlocks, shapeshifters, werewolves, and kind of vampires. There's one vampire there, and they're not really accepted. So this book came out, I think, in like 2010 or 2011 when I first started book blogging, and it's one of the first ones I read, and I loved it. I gave it 4 stars then, and I gave it 4 stars now because I loved it so much. So it's really fast paced. I love Sophie as a main character. I love seeing her getting used to this paranormal society, because even though that she's known that she's a witch for quite a few years now, she doesn't really know what that sort of entails, and she doesn't know much about her dad, who is a magical person on the council. So she starts finding out more about her own heritage. Her mum's, by the way, just a normal human. So I loved being back in Sophie's head and seeing all these characters again. Loved it so much. Her best friend is a gay vampire. I can't remember her name, but she's a gay vampire who loves pink, which is wonderful. And yeah, I just love this book so much. So as soon as I read this one, I decided that I would marathon the entire trilogy. And guys, this took me a day. Because I was just so into it. So the second book is Demon Glass, and this follows Sophie as she then leaves Hex Hall for a little bit and goes to spend some time with her dad. So we learn a bit more about her dad in this one. And then Spellbound is the final book in the trilogy that kind of brings everything together. I won't go into any more detail on these because obviously they're sequels, but I gave both of these 5 stars because they're wonderful. I just love them so much. They're such cute old school YA books that I would actually highly recommend to people who are picking these books up now. Wait, no. I would highly recommend these to people who are looking for some old school YA vibes, where the characters actually act their age and the stakes are about as high as you would expect from a teenage fantasy series. I honestly adore these, cannot recommend them enough, so I'm really glad that I finally reread them, and I'll be putting them on my shelf. After that, I read an adult thriller book called The Hike. This one is set in Norway. It's about a group of best friends from the UK. They go on a hiking trip. None of them are really experienced or seasoned hikers. They normally go on beach holidays together. And it turns out that a couple of years ago, I think it was, some young woman went missing there on this same trail, and it all comes together. It's all connected in some way, of course. I gave this one 3 stars. It was fast paced. I just didn't think it was anything incredible. I would recommend it if you're not a huge fan of thriller books, because I think it's a good one to sort of just get into and then forget about. But if you're a massive thriller reader like I am, then it's probably not going to stand out to you, to be honest. I then read Finding Bear because I got a copy of this from NetGalley, from the publisher, and this one comes out in, I think, September, and it's the sequel to The Last Bear by Hannah Gold, which, can you see? You can't quite see it, it's on this shelf up here. It's a middle grade book about a young girl who is taken to the Arctic by her father for his job, and she meets the last polar bear on the island and becomes friends with him, and it's all illustrated. It's honestly lovely. I love Hannah Gold's books. This was the sequel. I gave it 4 stars. I didn't love it as much as I loved The Last Bear, to be honest, and I think the reason for that is it started to feel quite in your face with its messaging, but I don't think it would feel like that for a middle grade audience, which is who it's aimed towards. It was just for me. I'm 30. I would have liked a little bit more subtlety, but I understand when you're writing for children, like the one who's screaming outside right now, you can't really do that. You do need to be more obvious with your messaging and like connections and metaphors and all of that. So yeah, I did really enjoy it still, and I didn't get to see the illustrations in this one because they weren't done at the time that I read the arc, but I'm looking forward to getting a physical copy and flicking through them. I then kind of reread a book. I read the graphic novel of Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys, and I've read the novel before years ago when I first started book blogging. So I bought this one on a whim because it was on sale. I love this so much. The artwork was really good. This is about a young girl called Lena who lives in Lithuania with her parents and brother. It's set in 1941, and the Soviet soldiers come for her family and they're all taken away. She, her mother and brother are shipped off to Russia or Siberia, and they were placed into working camps there. I remember the first time I read Between Shades of Grey, and it was kind of my introduction to Eastern European history because I'd not learnt any in school at all. When we were taught about World War II, seemingly every single year in history classes, we only focused on the UK and Germany. I wasn't even told that the Americans joined the war. I wasn't told what was going on with Russia and what they were doing on that side of Europe and the whole thing between Hitler and Stalin. So I really didn't know much, and I found this very educational, and I loved this graphic novel adaptation of it. I would highly recommend it. I would recommend reading the actual book first because Ruta Sepetys has an amazing way of writing prose in her books. I love all of her work, I think. I can't remember. Fountains of Silence wasn't great, but everything else has been brilliant. So yeah, I'm glad that I read this one because it's a really good kind of companion to the novel. And now I really want to reread her book. I gave this one 4 stars. I then finished listening to what I think was my second audiobook of the year, which is a bit wild. It was Did I Ever Tell You This by Sam Neill. I recently discovered that Sam Neill is suffering from cancer. I think he said it's like blood cancer of some sort, and he is in remission now, or was at the time of finishing this book. And so he has written a memoir which he also narrated. Sam Neill has always been one of my favourite actors. I've really enjoyed him. It's mainly because Jurassic Park is my favourite film of all time, and franchise, I love it. So I really wanted to support him and listen to his audiobook. He did say some stuff in there that like I didn't personally agree with, but I don't think you really need to agree with everything someone says if you're reading their memoir for you to still enjoy it. I don't think, anyway. So I gave this one 4 stars. It was really well narrated. I did think it like dragged a little bit in the middle, but because he was narrating it himself, I really enjoyed the waffling and his sort of tangents that he went on and all the name dropping he did, because you could tell things were like coming back to him as he was writing about something else, and he was just like went with the flow. So really enjoyed that. He didn't talk much about Jurassic Park, which is a bit sad. I was hoping for a bit more of that, but he probably did that intentionally, let's be honest. He's had a really long career outside of Jurassic Park, so it's understandable. I gave the memoir 4 stars, and then I read The First 15 Lives of Harry August, which I gave 3 stars. This was really disappointing. It was a massive drag, but I didn't hate it. I really liked the concept, and that's the main reason I gave this 3 stars. This is about a man called Harry August who lives his entire lifespan, so I think he tends to die when he's around like 80, 75, and then he dies, and then he's reborn as a baby, a newborn, and he has all of his memories from his previous lives. So when he wakes up for the first time in his second life, he's kind of like, what on earth is this? What's happened? He's like, he turns into a child who is super intelligent because they remember everything, but that sends him a bit like off the rails, and then you see him sort of coming to terms with it as he lives in his different lives. I was expecting this to be a lot more action-packed and intriguing than it actually was. A lot of this was actually Harry talking to someone who you could probably consider his nemesis, and I'm not really interested in those kinds of stories, so that's why I only gave this one 3 stars. It wasn't bad, it just dragged so much, and I feel like Claire North was going for like a really like literary style. Harry August sounded like a snob when he was speaking, and I couldn't get entirely on board with this, so that's a shame. I'm going to give this one back to the charity shop where I found it. And then the final book I read in May was Dust Child. I love this one. I gave this one 4 stars. It's by the author of The Mountains Sing, which I loved. This one is told in several different timelines. It follows several different people, but it's mainly set in, well, it's entirely set in Vietnam, but it's mainly set in Vietnam in the 60s and 70s. That timeline follows 2 sisters who go to a city in order to become basically sex workers for the American soldiers, because they've heard from their friends that those jobs pay really well, and so they'll work in bars and drink with the soldiers and then occasionally they'll take them for like what they call a long time, and they go to a hotel room or whatever. So it follows those two sisters, and then in the more present day, in like the 2000s, it follows the child of an American soldier who was raised by nuns because his Vietnamese mother gave him away and the American soldier just left or died or, you know, wasn't around. So he grew up with nuns, and it's about him trying to get to America because he knows that he comes from an American family on one side, that he is mixed race. And then the other storyline follows an American soldier, or a veteran I suppose, who was placed in Vietnam, and then he comes back because he didn't like how he left it, basically. He did have a relationship with a young Vietnamese girl there, and he wants to find her and kind of set things right. So these storylines are all interconnected in some way, and I just loved the way that the author presented this story. She is so talented at making you feel so much for every single person in the story. I can't say I was particularly on the side of the American soldier, but I saw what went on and what happened to him and why he was the way he was. And like I was saying earlier, well actually I was saying this in relation to World War II, but it's the same thing. I didn't really know much about it until I read The Mountains Sing. So after that I did some research and obviously also read this book. So I really appreciate this author for introducing me to a point in history that I didn't really know much about. I think she does it really well. I think if you even don't know much about the Vietnam War, these are really good books to read because she does present it really well and gives you enough context for you to understand what the Vietnamese people were going through at the time. I love this one, would highly recommend it, and I'd also recommend her other book, The Mountains Sing. And those were all the books that I read in May. I know there weren't very many compared to normal. I am in the middle of a couple of books, but I don't know if I'm going to finish them in time for June to start, so I'll just carry them over into the next month, which is something I don't normally do. I normally put books off until the start of the month if I'm in the mood to read them, which is really bad, but maybe I should try to change that this month. Anyway, let me know if you have read any of these books in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I'll speak to you all in the next one. Bye.